Welcome to Somnia Lore, your place for peaceful, sleepy adventures. Subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon.
It began with a sound that wasn't quite a sound at all, more like the soft suggestion of music drifting in from a place no one could name. It trembled in the dark like a whisper through an old window frame, and for the child who first heard it, it was as ordinary as breathing. He didn't question why the stars seemed to murmur his name, or why the breeze carried words no one else could hear. To him, it was simply the way the world worked, half dream, half memory, and always just on the edge of sleep. He would lie awake at night, his small frame curled beneath a thin blanket, listening to the slow creak of the wooden rafters above. The village around him was quiet at those hours, the world wrapped in its own hush, but he never felt alone. The sky was his companion, filled with voices like threads of silk, weaving themselves into lullabies he could not forget. At first, the whispers spoke in riddles, shapes and phrases that melted the moment he tried to repeat them aloud. The river bends to those who wait, one voice had said. The shadow loves the flame, murmured another. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew they were meant for him. He felt them bloom in his chest like secret flowers. The child was not remarkable in the way others thought children should be. He was neither strong nor quick, nor especially clever with sums or games. But when others stumbled, he would reach out. When others cried, he would sit quietly, waiting with them. There was something about him, a patience that stretched farther than his years. As though he had already lived many lives, the whispers seemed to nurture this, teaching him not in loud commands, but in slow repetitions, soft as waves against the shore. He grew with an odd tenderness, the kind that made adults shake their heads, unsure whether to call him fragile or wise. In truth, he was neither. He was simply listening. He noticed things most others overlooked, the way shadows lengthened across stone walls at dusk, the way his mother's hands trembled slightly when she sewed, the way an injured bird's chest rose and fell even when it looked too small to survive. All of it entered him, stayed with him, until he carried not just his own feelings, but fragments of everyone around him. This gift, or burden, though he didn't yet know the word, did not make him popular. Other children often looked at him with a wary curiosity, sensing he was different. He was not unkind, but he moved slowly where they rushed, lingered in silence when they shouted. Still, one or two were drawn to him. They would sit beside him under the old tree at the edge of the fields, where he traced shapes in the dirt with a stick. He never explained the whispers to them. He only listened, nodding as they spoke of their fears, their games, their small quarrels at home. He was younger than his years, and older, all at once. Whispers seemed pleased when he chose to listen. Some nights they hummed with a low contentment that spread across his chest and settled in his bones. Other nights they grew restless, urgent but still never harsh. Stay with them, one urged. Your stillness is your strength, another reminded him. He clung to these words. Though he never fully understood them, they felt less like commands and more like a hand resting gently on his shoulder. Time moved the way it always does in childhood, slow and endless, then suddenly gone. His world did not change in great bursts, but in tiny shifts. The fields he played in seemed smaller each season. The faces of his parents, always tired but gentle, grew lined. His own limbs stretched longer, his shadow taller, until one day he realized the blanket that once swallowed him now barely covered his ankles. Through it all, the whispers stayed, guiding him quietly from one stage to the next. He began to wonder if the voices belonged to stars at all. Perhaps they were memories of people long gone, or echoes of thoughts never spoken aloud. Sometimes he imagined they were fragments of himself, scattered across time, calling back to him from places he had not yet reached. Whatever they were, they remained faithful, appearing each night, waiting for him to close his eyes and drift into that half-dream where their language was clear. One night in the deep stretch of winter, when the air outside rattled the shutters and frost bloomed like white fire across the windows, the voices spoke differently. They were softer, slower, almost mournful. You will learn what it means to carry, one said, and you will learn what it means to let go. He sat up in bed, staring into the dark, shivering, though not from the cold. The words clung to him, heavy and tender, all at once. He felt for the first time that something was coming. He did not yet know what. He only knew that his path was not to be ordinary. The whispers were weaving something through him, something that felt larger than his small life, though it revealed itself only thread by thread. So he closed his eyes again, pulled the too small blanket over his shoulders, and listened. The rafters creaked, the frost pressed against the glass, and the voices sang their strange lullabies into his bones. Somewhere inside him, A seed was planted. He would not understand it for years, but it was there now, quiet, waiting, the beginning of everything that was still to come. And though he did not yet have words for it, he felt a warmth rise gently through him, as though the universe itself had bent low to whisper in his ear, "You are loved, you are needed, you are not alone." The years drifted forward like a slow tide, carrying him along in their quiet rhythm. What had begun as the strange lullabies of the stars did not vanish as he grew, but rather deepened, taking on new tones, new textures. The whispers no longer felt like distant music, but like companions who walked beside him, slipping into his thoughts, as naturally as breath. At times he wondered whether he had invented them, some trick of a lonely child's imagination. Yet whenever he doubted, they answered in ways that could not be denied, comforting him in silence, offering words that arrived precisely when he needed them most. He carried these whispers into his days. At school, while others competed over games or struggled to remember long recitations, he found himself listening, truly listening to the weight of someone's sigh, to the tremble in their voice, to the way their shoulders sagged when they thought no one noticed. He would sit beside a classmate whose eyes were red from crying and say nothing at all, only letting his stillness be an answer. Strangely, that was often enough. Even adults began to notice how people relaxed near him, how quarrels seemed to soften when he was present, though no one could explain why. He didn't explain it either. He didn't have to. There was one boy a little louder than most who always teased him for his odd silences. Dreamer, he called him, tugging at his sleeve or trying to startle him out of his reverie. Yet this boy lingered longer than the others, drawn by something he could not name. One afternoon, when the air was warm with the smell of cut grass, the boy finally slumped beside him under the old tree. "Do you ever get tired of being so quiet?" he asked. The child smiled, small, almost shy curve of his lips. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but sometimes the quiet listens back." The boy frowned, puzzled, but for the first time, he didn't laugh. He only leaned back against the bark, staring at the sky with him until the sun began to sink. From that day forward, their silences became a kind of language. The whispers were never jealous of these new bonds. If anything, they seemed to approve, humming more brightly when he shared his stillness with others. "This is how you stretch," they murmured one evening, as he sat at his desk trying to finish his writing assignments. Not through words alone, but through presence. He let the words wash over him, though their meaning still seemed too large to hold. At home, life was simple, though not always easy. His parents worked long hours, returning each evening with tired eyes and hands roughened from labor. Yet even in their exhaustion, there was love. He noticed it in the way his mother smoothed the creases from his shirt, in the way his father left small notes folded by his bed, reminding him to be kind to himself. Sometimes he wondered if they too could hear the whispers, but had long since forgotten how to listen. When he asked once, his mother only chuckled softly and kissed his forehead. "You've always had the strangest dreams," she said. He didn't press further. One winter, when the fields lay bare and the night seemed endless, the boy grew ill. His body ached, his chest heavy with fever, and for the first time the whispers fell silent. Days passed in a blur of sweat and half-sleep, and he felt a gnawing emptiness where the voices used to be. Fear clung to him, not of the illness itself, but of the silence it brought. On the third night, as the fever finally began to loosen, he whispered aloud into the dark, "Please don't leave me." And as if carried on the faintest draft, he heard them again. "We never left. We never will." Relief swept through him, so powerfully, he wept into his pillow until exhaustion pulled him back under. When spring returned, so too did his strength. But something within him had shifted. The absence of the whispers during his illness had revealed how deeply he depended on them, how much of his sense of self was tied to that unseen guidance. He realized then that this connection was not a childish fancy, but the quiet root of who he was becoming. He promised himself he would never close his heart to it, no matter how strange it made him seem to others. In the years that followed, his abilities, if they could be called that, grew more refined. He did not move objects with his hands nor summon fire or light. His gift was subtler, a way of feeling what others carried, of bending gently toward their needs without them ever asking. A neighbor once remarked that when the boy sat with her after her husband passed, it felt as though he took some of the grief and held it for her just long enough for her to breathe again. She never told him this directly, but he saw it in her softened eyes, and the whispers hummed in agreement. This is the work. There were moments of doubt, of course. He sometimes longed to be like the other children, running without thought, laughing without weight. He envied their ease, their freedom from the constant flood of emotions he seemed unable to shut out. Yet each time the longing grew heavy, the whispers reminded him gently, "Your difference is not your burden, it is your bridge." And slowly, he began to believe them. One evening, as he and his friend sat beneath the tree once more, fireflies stitching brief sparks through the dusk, the boy confessed something. "I think I hear things other people can't," he said softly. His friend turned to him, not with mockery this time, but with curiosity. "Like what?" The boy hesitated, then answered, "Like sky, maybe. Like people's hearts when they can't find the words." His friend studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded. "That sounds lonely." The boy smiled, a little sadly. "Sometimes it is." His friend reached out, brushing their shoulders together. "Well then, it's good you're not alone right now." That simple gesture lit something within him brighter than any whisper could. From then on, he understood that his path was not only about listening to the unseen, but also about learning how to share himself with those who could not hear it. The whispers would always be there, but they were teaching him to live in both worlds. The quiet one only he could hear, and the louder one where every small act of kindness rippled outward like light across water. And though he was still so young, still uncertain of what lay ahead, he felt the faint stirring of purpose beginning to take shape. It was fragile, like the first breath of dawn, but it was there, waiting to unfold. The boy carried those moments with him, quiet treasures tucked into the folds of his days. Sitting beneath the old tree, feeling the brush of his friend's shoulder against his own, he realized something profound. Sometimes the most important truths were not whispered by stars, but revealed in the closeness of another human being. Yet the voices did not fade because of this. Instead, they grew gentler, less like a mysterious song from far away, and more like a soft harmony weaving into his daily life. They seemed to step back slightly, allowing him space to discover the lessons they had long been preparing him for. It was during this time that an elder in the village began to notice him. She was not a relative, not a teacher, not even someone who spoke often with his parents, but she had eyes that seemed to see beneath the surface of things. She would watch him as he lingered in silence when others hurried, or as he bent down to comfort a younger child without hesitation. One evening, when dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and silver, she stopped him as he walked home with his friend. "You carry a stillness," she said, her voice worn with age but steady. "It does not belong to most children. Do you know where it comes from?" He wanted to answer truthfully, to tell her about the whispers that followed him like invisible companions. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he lowered his gaze and shrugged. "I don't know, I just feel things." She studied him for a long moment, her face lined with stories no one else could read. Then she simply nodded. "That is enough," she said. "Sometimes feeling is the beginning of knowing," and with that she walked away, leaving him bewildered but strangely comforted. In the days that followed, the elder began to appear more often. She would sit in the square with her basket of herbs, beckoning him to help her sort the leaves. She would ask questions not about arithmetic or chores, but about what he noticed, what colors he saw in the sky, what sounds he heard in the silence between bird calls. At first he thought these were riddles, but then he realized she was teaching him something subtler, to trust his own way of perceiving the world. His friend teased him about spending time with the old dreamer, but the boy didn't mind. There was a peace in those moments, a sense that the elder understood what others did not. She did not demand answers. She only asked him to notice, and the more he noticed, the clearer the whispers became, as though they were pleased he had found someone who could guide him without breaking the fragile balance he lived within. One afternoon, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched across the fields, the elder placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will learn in time that listening is not only about hearing, it is about holding space. You hold it well." Her eyes shone with something like pride, though tinged with sorrow. He felt the weight of her words press into his chest, as though they were meant to stay there for years to come. At home, he began to notice how her teachings lingered. When his father returned weary from work, the boy didn't fill the silence with questions. He simply sat nearby, mending small things, waiting until his father sighed and began to speak. When his mother hummed softly over her sewing, he listened to the tune as if it were another whisper from the stars, carrying truths hidden in its rhythm. The house felt different, not less tired, but somehow more tender, as though his quiet presence stitched invisible threads through its walls. The elder's guidance did not make him feel less strange among other children, but it gave him a confidence he had not known before. His silence was no longer an accident, it was a choice, a kind of strength. Even those who teased him seemed to sense it, pulling back when their words failed to shake him. His friend especially began to watch him differently, as though realizing the boy's odd ways were not weakness, but something deeper, something unspoken yet powerful. The whispers responded to this growth with new tones. Their words were less cryptic now, less tangled in riddles. "You are beginning," they would say. "Do not rush. Do not fear. Beginning is enough." The boy clung to these messages, repeating them to himself when doubt pressed in. But with growth came new weight. For the first time, he felt the burden of truly sensing others. He noticed when his teacher's voice cracked slightly during a lesson, when a classmate's laughter was too sharp to be real. He felt these things as though they were his own, and though he tried to carry them, sometimes they left him heavy. It was during those moments that the elder's words returned. Holding space is not the same as taking everything inside yourself. He did not understand fully yet, but he tried. He practiced breathing slowly beneath the old tree, letting feelings move through him without clinging. He practiced sharing moments of silence with his friend without absorbing every flicker of sadness or worry. Little by little, he began to balance. And still the whispers sang on, not demanding, never commanding, only reminding him again and again that he was walking a path few could see. He did not know where it would lead or why it had chosen him, but he felt a quiet trust blooming like the first fragile leaves of spring. One evening, the elder looked at him with a sadness he did not yet understand. "You will outgrow me," she said gently. "That is the way of things. But remember, silence is not emptiness. It is where the deepest truths are waiting." She smiled, and for a fleeting second he thought he saw in her eyes the same starlight that whispered to him at night. He wanted to ask her what she knew, whether she too had once listened the way he did. But the words caught again, and all he could do was nod. That night, as he lay beneath his too small blanket, the rafters creaking and the frost edging the window pane, the whispers came louder, brighter than ever before. They did not speak in riddles, they only said one thing, over and over, until he drifted into sleep. "You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone." The boy woke the next morning with those words still lingering in his chest, as if they had been carved into him during sleep. "You are not alone." He repeated them silently while he dressed, while he stepped barefoot across the cool wooden floor, while the first light of dawn crept into the house. They became like a quiet rhythm beneath everything he did, steady and reassuring. And yet, as he walked through his days, he began to realize that believing he was not alone was different from living it. It was one thing to hear the whispers in solitude, but another to let himself be bound to people in the fragile, imperfect way of human hearts. His friend, the one who had first called him a dreamer, remained by his side more often than not. Their companionship had grown into something easy, unspoken, like the steady flow of a stream. They didn't need constant words. Sometimes they would spend hours under the old tree, tracing patterns in the soil or lying flat on their backs to watch the clouds drift apart and merge again. The boy discovered that silence shared was not emptiness but fullness, as though two stillnesses together made a new kind of music. Yet he also began to feel the edges of distance. His friend's laughter grew louder with other children, more careless and bright. Games and dares began to pull him toward groups that the boy did not join. The boy did not resent this, but he noticed the space it created between them. In those moments, he would listen harder for the whispers, trying to reassure himself that their connection remained, even when his friend was elsewhere. One late afternoon, after a long day of lessons and wandering thoughts, his friend found him sitting alone at the edge of the fields. "You're always thinking," the friend said, dropping to the grass beside him. "What is it you think about?" The boy hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I think about people, about why they feel the way they do, about how sometimes, even when they're smiling, they're not really happy." He turned to look at his friend, half afraid of being mocked, but the other boy only nodded, picking at the blades of grass. "I guess I don't notice that stuff." The boy looked back at the horizon, and I can't help noticing. The friend was quiet for a while, then said softly, "Maybe that's why you're here, to notice what the rest of us miss." The boy felt those words settle into him like a stone dropped gently into a pond, rippling outward until they touched everything. The elder, too, remained present in his life, though her steps grew slower with each passing season. She seemed to know that her time with him was measured, and so she gave him pieces of her wisdom in small, deliberate offerings. Sometimes it was a simple phrase like, "Patience grows deeper roots than urgency." Other times it was a story about her own childhood, about mistakes she had made, about the ways silence had saved her when words could not. He absorbed it all, even when he didn't fully understand. But it wasn't only the elder who shaped him. His bond with his friend, delicate and shifting, taught him something different. It taught him about the ache of closeness and distance, all at once. About how love, even in its earliest, most innocent form, was never simple. He discovered how easy it was to miss someone who was only a few steps away, how absence could live inside presence. One evening, they lay in the grass again, watching fireflies spark against the gathering dark. His friend asked, "Do you think we'll always sit here like this?" even when we're old. The boy thought for a long moment. I don't know, he said finally, but I think the memory of this will stay, even if we don't. His friend frowned. That sounds sad. It doesn't feel sad, the boy answered softly. It feels like knowing the moment matters now, so we should hold it while it's here. His friend didn't reply, but after a while he reached out and let their hands rest lightly together in the grass. That simple connection, the warmth of skin against skin, the trust of unspoken words was enough to etch itself deep inside the boy, a moment he knew he would carry long after it had passed. The whispers hummed gently that night, a tone that felt like approval but also like warning. Hearts are fragile. They breathed. To notice them is to risk breaking with them. To love is to stretch beyond yourself. The boy understood only part of it, but he felt the weight. He knew already that love, even in friendship, was not safe. It was beautiful precisely because it was not safe. The seasons shifted again, and with them, the rhythm of his days. His friend drifted closer at times, farther at others, drawn into circles of laughter and play that did not always include him. The boy learned to let this happen without anger, though it ate. The elder grew weaker, her cough sharper, her absences from the square more frequent. At home, his parents seemed to age in ways he hadn't noticed before, their shoulders stooping, their sighs longer at the end of each day. All around him, the world seemed to be whispering the same lesson in different voices. Everything changes. And yet, even as change pressed in on all sides, he discovered a quiet resilience within himself. The whispers reminded him, you are not here to cling, you are here to carry, to notice, to let go, and still love. So he continued, balancing between the worlds, the world of stars that sang to him in secret, and the world of human hearts that trembled and broke and healed beside him. Each fed the other, each demanded something of him, and though he was still so young, still so uncertain, he began to see that his path was not about choosing between them, it was about weaving them together, one fragile thread at a time. That night, as he lay beneath his blanket, the voices returned with a new note, soft but tinged with sorrow. You will lose and you will gain, they whispered. And in the losing, you will learn the deepest kind of love. He closed his eyes, clutching the memory of his friend's hand in his own, and felt both comforted and afraid. He did not yet know what losses awaited him, but he knew they would come, and he knew somehow that he would not face them alone. The boy rose one morning to find the air heavy with a silence that felt different from the usual calm of dawn. It was the kind of silence that made birds hesitate before singing, the kind that seemed to press against the chest with invisible weight. He stepped outside and saw the elder's chair empty in the square. She was not there to greet the day as she always had, not there to watch the slow waking of the village. A chill spread through him, though the sun was warm on his skin. By midday, the whispers inside him confirmed what his heart already feared. The elder's time had ended in the night, quietly as though she had slipped into another story while the village slept. He stood among the people as they spoke of her in hushed voices, their words carrying sorrow and reverence in equal measure. For the first time, he felt the raw edge of loss, not as a thought or a distant warning, but as a weight that settled into his very bones. His friend came to stand beside him, uncertain, restless, not knowing what to say. She was old. His friend finally muttered, as though reason could soften grief. But reason did not reach the boy. He felt the absence too sharply, like the sudden vanishing of a star from the sky. That night, when the whispers came, they carried no comfort. They spoke only a truth he could barely hold. This is the beginning. Every bond will teach you what it means to lose, and what it means to carry forward. The days that followed were heavy with remembrance. The villagers gathered, telling stories of the elder, her sharp wit, her wisdom, the way her laughter had once echoed down the stone paths. The boy listened to every word, storing them like treasures, for he knew they would be the last new memories of her. He sat beneath the old tree one evening and tried to repeat her phrases to himself, afraid they might slip away if he did not hold them tightly. He discovered that memory was both a gift and a burden. It preserved what was gone, but it also reminded him, with every recall, of the emptiness left behind. His friend noticed the change in him. You're quieter than before, he said, tossing a pebble toward the stream. Quieter even for you. I don't know how to speak without feeling the silence inside, the boy admitted. It's as if words can't hold what's gone. The friend didn't answer, but after a while he said, maybe that's why you still have the stars. Maybe they can hold it for you. The boy looked upward, though it was still daylight. He wondered if the stars, even unseen, were listening. That night, when darkness came, he lay awake, eyes fixed on the scattered lights above. The whispers returned, softer now, as though they too mourned. She is not gone, they breathed. She is in the patterns you see, in the truths you carry, in the silence that now feels different. It comforted him, but it also unsettled him. To carry someone within memory meant never being free of them, and he wondered if he had the strength for that kind of weight. He since turned once more. His parents grew slower, their movements marked by fatigue. His friend's laughter became sharper, tinged with the boldness of youth rushing toward risk. The boy, however, seemed caught between worlds. One foot in the games of childhood, the other in the quiet awareness of change and loss. He was often asked why he stared so long at nothing, why he drifted into thought when others demanded play. He could not explain it, even to himself. All he knew was that every sound, every glance, every fleeting moment seemed to carry layers he could not ignore. One evening, his friend pulled him toward the fields where others were gathered around a small fire. The air was filled with laughter, songs and dares spoken too loudly. The boy sat at the edge, half within and half apart, watching the glow flicker across faces that were both familiar and suddenly strange. He realized then that life was pulling them all forward, scattering them toward futures he could not yet see. His heart tightened, sensing the approach of more goodbyes. Later, as the fire burned low and shadows stretched across the fields, he walked home alone. The whispers stirred again, not as comfort but as a challenge. Will you resist the flow of time, or will you walk with it? To cling is to suffer. To notice is to endure. To endure is to love. He thought of the elder, of her steady presence, and felt how her absence had reshaped the village. He thought of his friend whose hand had once rested against his, warm and certain, and wondered how long such closeness could survive the widening spaces between them. Sleep came slowly that night. When it did, it carried a dream. In it, the elder stood beneath the tree, not frail but whole, her eyes bright as when she was young. She did not speak, but she lifted a hand and pointed to the horizon, where the first light of dawn was breaking. He woke with tears on his face, and an ache that felt both tender and sharp. It was not a farewell, he realized, but a direction. She was telling him to keep walking, even when the path was shadowed. The boy rose before the rest of the house stirred. He stepped outside, the air cool and damp with dew, and walked to the fields alone. The horizon blushed with early light, and in that quiet space, he whispered to himself, "I will carry you. I will carry all of it." The words felt heavy, but they also felt like a vow. He did not know yet what carrying would require, but he knew it was the only way forward. That day marked a shift inside him. He still laughed at times, still walked with his friends, still listened to the hum of voices in the square. But there was a depth beneath it all, a gravity that others did not see. The whispers no longer startled him. They had become part of his own thoughts, woven into his being like an unseen thread. He began to suspect that they were not separate from him at all, but something his heart had always known, finally given voice. As another season neared its close, he sat again beneath the tree, alone, tracing patterns in the dirt with his fingers. The stars were not yet visible, but he imagined them waiting above the sky's pale veil. He thought of loss, of memory, of the weight and the gift of carrying forward. He thought of love, not only as closeness, but as endurance, as the quiet courage to walk on even when silence pressed hardest. And in that thought, he felt something settle inside him, not an answer, but a beginning. The story was still unfolding, and he was still at its threshold. Whatever lay ahead, he would meet it with the same vow he had whispered at dawn to carry, to endure, to love. The vow he whispered at dawn lingered within him, a quiet thread woven into every step he took. Life did not pause for grief or promise. It flowed on, carrying him with it, yet now he moved differently, as though each motion were a choice. As though each breath held weight. He began to notice the village in ways he hadn't before. The tired curve of his father's shoulders, the way his mother hummed softly while kneading bread, the fleeting smile his friend gave before turning his gaze elsewhere. All these details, once overlooked, felt precious now, shimmering with a fragile impermanence. The whispers, too, shifted in tone. Where once they carried mystery or warnings, now they felt like companions, walking beside him in silence. Sometimes they spoke, but often they lingered without words, like a hand resting lightly on his back, guiding without pressing. He no longer feared them. He accepted them as part of his being, like his breath or heartbeat, natural and ever-present. One evening, he found himself wandering to the old square where the elder used to sit. Her chair was empty but not forgotten. Someone had placed wildflowers there, their petals soft against the aging wood. He sat beside it, feeling her presence not in the chair itself, but in the way the wind moved through the branches above, in the way the light faded gently across the stones. "I'm still carrying you," he whispered, not expecting an answer, and yet the silence that followed was so full, so complete, it felt as though she had heard. His friend arrived not long after, a restless energy always around him. You come here often, he said, tossing a pebble across the stones. It's like you're waiting for something. Not waiting, the boy replied softly, just listening. To what? To everything. The friend laughed, shaking his head. You've always been strange. But his eyes lingered with a curiosity he couldn't quite hide, as though he wondered what truths the boy might be hearing that he could not. Seasons shifted again. The air grew crisp, leaves curling and falling in amber drifts. Work in the fields became harder, the earth stiff beneath their hands. The boy's father grew quieter, his movements slower, and the boy noticed the tremble in his hands when he thought no one was looking. His mother sang less often, her humming replaced by sighs at night when she thought everyone was asleep. The boy did not speak of these changes, but he carried them too, as he carried the elder's memory. Each detail became part of the unseen weight on his shoulders, and yet he did not resist it. He only walked with it, step by step. One day his friend pulled him toward the edge of the village where the land opened wide to hills and rivers beyond. Let's go, he said, his eyes alive with yearning. Let's leave for a while, see what's out there. Aren't you curious? The boy hesitated. The thought stirred something in him. A restlessness he had tried to quiet. He had always gazed at the horizon, wondering what lay beyond, but the whispers reminded him gently, to leave is to change, and to change is to carry differently. He looked at his friend and saw in his expression the hunger for freedom, for escape, for more than what the village could offer. I'm not ready, the boy said finally, his voice quiet but steady. Not ready? His friend's brow furrowed. We're not children anymore. If we wait, we'll end up stuck here forever, just like... He stopped, biting down on the words. But the boy knew what he meant, just like their parents, just like everyone else. The boy lowered his gaze. Maybe being here isn't being stuck. Maybe it's seeing what's here until it changes. His friend groaned in frustration, but he did not argue further. Still, something shifted between them after that day. Their laughter came less often. Their silences heavier. The boy felt the distance growing, not because of anger, but because their paths were beginning to bend in different directions. That night, beneath the stars, the whispers spoke with unusual clarity. You cannot walk every road with every soul. To love someone is to let them choose, even when their path drifts away from yours. The words ached, but he knew them to be true. He lay awake, staring at the constellations, tracing patterns that reminded him of both closeness and absence. Then time carried him forward. His friend spent more days at the village's edge, speaking with travelers, asking questions about distant lands. The boy stayed, helping his father with tasks that grew harder each day. He learned to mend, to lift, to listen. At times he felt older than his years, shaped not by age but by the quiet gravity of all he carried. One evening, as he sat beneath the tree, his friend came again, restless and certain. I'm leaving, he said, the words falling like stones. Not forever, maybe, but I have to see more. I can't stay here and wait for life to pass me by. The boy's chest tightened, but he did not argue. He looked at his friend's face, the determination in his eyes, and he knew resistance would only turn love into bitterness. Instead, he nodded, his voice soft. Then go and carry what you can with you. His friend paused, startled by the gentleness. And you? I'll stay. For now. There are things here I still need to hold. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their bond stretched thin between them. Finally, his friend reached out, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. Then, remember me. Don't let me vanish into the silence. I couldn't, the boy whispered. Not even if I tried. That night, as his friend disappeared into the distance, the boy sat beneath the stars once more, the whispers stirring gently around him. They did not comfort or explain. They simply moved with him, echoing the ache of absence, reminding him that love's truest form was endurance. He looked to the horizon, where shadows had swallowed his friend's figure, and whispered into the night, I'll carry you too. The stars shimmered faintly in reply, and he felt the vow within him deepen, binding not just to memory but to the endless unfolding of what lay ahead. He closed his eyes, the silence thick around him, not empty but full of voices, full of bonds, full of everything he could not yet name. The boy woke the next morning to a stillness that felt heavier than usual, a silence layered with the absence of his friend. The house smelled of bread baking, the slow rhythm of his mother's work filling the air. But even that familiar scent could not soften the hollow space left behind. His father sat by the doorway, sharpening a worn tool with slow, careful strokes, the rasp of stone against metal steady as breath. Life went on, as it always did, but the boy felt a piece of himself wandering somewhere beyond the hills, carried with the footsteps of the one who had left. The whispers were quiet that day, not absent but patient, as if they too understood the need for silence. He moved through the hours with a strange awareness. Each task, each glance, each sound seemed more vivid, as though the world had grown sharper in the wake of change. When he fetched water from the stream, he noticed the way ripples bent the reflection of his own face, splitting it into shifting pieces. He thought of his friend, now a ripple in a wider current carried toward places unseen. That night, as he lay awake, he imagined the journey his friend might be on, the roads, the strangers, the distant fires. He pictured the laughter that would come with new faces, the questions asked, the answers discovered, and though the thought brought both pride and ache, it also brought a deeper understanding. To love someone meant to let them be more than what they had been with you. It was a lesson the whispers seemed to echo softly, their voice blending with the hum of the night. To release is not to lose. To release is to trust. Days became weeks. The boy carried the rhythms of the village, helping his father in the fields, listening to his mother's quiet stories as she worked, sitting in the square as the older villagers spoke of seasons past. He learned to watch closely, to notice the way people's eyes shifted when they spoke of longing, the way laughter sometimes covered sorrow, the way silence often held truths that words could not carry. One evening, while he sat beneath the tree, a child from the village approached him, shy but insistent. She carried a small bundle of wild flowers clutched tightly in her hands. "Will you take these to the chair?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. Together they walked to the square, where the elder's chair still rested, weathered but steady. The boy placed the flowers gently upon it, and the child looked up at him with wide eyes. "Do you think she knows?" "Yes," he said, his voice calm and certain. "She always knows." The child smiled faintly, reassured, and ran off again into the fading light. The boy stood there a while longer, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. In that moment, he realized he was no longer only a listener to the whispers. He was becoming someone others might turn to, someone who carried not just his own grief but pieces of theirs as well. The whispers stirred then, almost approvingly, though they spoke no words. Their silence was enough, as though acknowledging that he had stepped quietly into another stage of his journey. As another season turned, he began to dream more vividly. Sometimes he saw the elder, sometimes his friend, sometimes faces he did not know. In one dream, he found himself standing at the edge of a vast ocean, waves moving in slow, luminous arcs beneath a sky full of stars. His friend stood far down the shore, too distant to call out, but close enough for the boy to recognize. The elder was there too, seated on a rock, smiling faintly, her eyes reflecting constellations. When he tried to walk toward them, the sand shifted under his feet, each step pulling him deeper, until he realized he could not reach either figure. He woke breathless, the memory of the dream lingering like a riddle he could not solve. The whispers came gently then, as if answering the unspoken question. Not all distances can be crossed by footsteps. Some are crossed only by remembering. The words stayed with him. He thought of them often as he worked, as he watched his father grow slower, as he listened to the laughter of other children. He wondered if memory itself was a kind of bridge, one that could keep souls connected even when roads divided. One dusk, as he walked the edge of the fields, he noticed the first stars appearing. The sky was pale and tender, the horizon fading into deep indigo. He stopped and whispered aloud, "Are you out there?" The words were not directed at anyone in particular. His friend, the elder, perhaps even the whispers themselves. The silence that followed felt alive, carrying both absence and presence in equal measure. That night, he dreamed again. This time he saw, not the ocean, but a vast field of tall grass, swaying under moonlight. The whispers moved like wind through the grass, guiding him forward. At the center of the field was a single stone, smooth and glowing faintly, etched with lines he could not read. When he touched it, warmth spread through his hand and into his chest, filling him with a deep calm. He woke with tears, though he did not know if they came from sorrow or from peace. The following morning, he went to the tree and sat in stillness, eyes closed, breathing slowly. He remembered the dream, the stone, the warmth. For the first time, he felt as though the whispers were not only outside him, but within, born of his own heart. Perhaps they always had been. Perhaps they were not voices separate from him, but his own truth, speaking softly in ways he had not learned to hear until now. As the day faded, he rose and walked back through the village. Children ran past, laughter spilling like water. His mother waved from the doorway, flower on her hands. His father nodded from the bench, weary but present. The boy carried them all in his heart, just as he carried his friend and the elder, just as he carried the whispers that were both mystery and self. That night beneath the stars, he whispered once more, "I will keep carrying," and though no words answered, the stillness felt full, vast, and eternal, as though the whole universe had leaned in to listen. The boy's vow lingered with him like a quiet ember, glowing within even as days stretched into weeks. Life in the village moved with its steady rhythm. Fields tilled, bread baked, water carried, fires tended. But for him, every act now seemed to hold a deeper pulse. It was as if the ordinary had grown layered, each moment carrying not just itself, but the weight of all that came before, all that might still come. He began to realize that to carry was not only to endure, but also to notice, to honor what might otherwise slip by unseen. His father's steps grew slower as the season deepened. The boy began to take on more of the work, his hands finding strength he hadn't known was within him. The whispers often came in the rhythm of labor while he lifted, while he mended, while he bent his back beneath the sun. To carry is to serve, they murmured, the words threading through the air like a gentle refrain. He accepted the weight not as burden but as inheritance, as the natural passing of time's torch. His mother, though weary, would smile when she caught him noticing small things, how she tucked strands of hair behind her ear, how her humming sometimes faltered and then returned. One evening as they sat together by the fire, she looked at him and said softly, "You've grown older than your years." He tilted his head uncertain. "Older?" "Not in your body," she said, "but in the way you see. You look at things as though you're already remembering them." The boy was silent, but her words rested deeply in him. He thought of the elder's chair, of his friend's absence, of the stars that seemed to answer his unspoken questions. He thought of the dreams where stones glowed and oceans stretched beyond reach. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he was living not only forward but also backward, holding what had been even as he moved into what was coming. As nights grew longer and colder, he found himself drawn more often to the tree where he had always listened. The stars became sharper in the crisp air, constellations etched more clearly against the darkness. One night, as frost silvered the ground, he lay beneath the branches and whispered aloud, "If memory is a bridge, where does it lead?" The silence was deep, yet not empty. A slow breath of wind stirred the leaves, and he felt the whispers within it. It leads to where love still lives, even when bodies do not. He thought of his friend somewhere beyond the hills, perhaps beneath the same stars. He thought of the elder, her laughter now woven into the hush of night. He thought of his parents still here, their presence heavy with the knowledge of one day not being. He closed his eyes, and for the first time he did not fear the ache that came. It was not only loss, it was proof of love. In the days that followed, he began to help others in quiet ways. When an old man dropped a bundle of sticks, he was there to lift it. When a child scraped her knee, he knelt to clean the wound gently. When his mother grew tired, he took her place at the hearth, tending the bread so she could rest. None of these acts felt grand or heroic, but each one deepened something inside him. As though kindness itself was a form of carrying, the whispers seemed to agree, their tones soft and warm. Every hand that helps is a memory already in bloom. The boy wondered if this was what the elder had known all along, that greatness was not in loud triumphs or distant journeys, but in the quiet endurance of care, the small, steady acts that built a life worth remembering. Yet, even with this understanding, he sometimes felt the pull of the horizon. At dusk, when the fields darkened and the sky opened wide, he would find himself staring outward, imagining the road his friend had taken. A longing stirred in him not just for the friend himself, but for the unknown, for the truths waiting beyond the reach of his current world. He did not resent his choice to stay. He knew it was right, but he also knew that longing was part of him now, as much as carrying was. One evening he dreamt again of the glowing stone. This time, when he touched it, he did not feel warmth alone. He felt a current flowing both forward and backward, connecting him to all he had loved and all he had yet to meet. He awoke with a start, breath quick, the dream more vivid than any before. For days afterward, he could not shake the sensation that he was standing at the edge of something. A threshold not of place but of understanding. The whispers grew more insistent then, not louder but closer, as though they were no longer beside him but within his very breath. They spoke in fragments, trust the silence, trust the weight, trust what is unseen. He listened, uncertain, but he felt the truth in their tone, even when he could not grasp their meaning fully. One late night, unable to sleep, he stepped outside. The village was quiet, the air sharp with frost. He walked to the square, where the elder's chair still stood, now dusted with silver. He brushed the frost from its surface and sat down, his small body filling the space she had once held. From that vantage, the village seemed both familiar and strange. The houses hunched like tired guardians, the paths empty but alive with memory. Closing his eyes, he let the silence surround him. For the first time, he did not wait for the whispers. Instead, he listened to his own breath, his own heart, and in that listening, he understood the whispers had always been him. Shaped by those he loved, carried forward like echoes that never truly ended. He opened his eyes, gazing at the stars above. They shimmered faintly indifferent, yet eternal. He smiled, not with joy alone, but with a soft recognition. "I see now," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "To carry is not just to remember, it is to become." And as the night deepened around him, he felt lighter, though nothing had been lifted. The weight was the same, but it no longer pressed, it sustained. He rose from the chair, leaving the frost behind, and walked slowly home, each step quiet, steady, and whole. The boy's understanding settled within him like a slow-burning flame, steady and unwavering. Yet even as it warmed him, it began to reshape the way he moved through the days. What once felt like endless repetition now carried a thread of purpose, each small action a continuation of something larger than himself. When he rose at dawn to fetch water, he did not think only of thirst, but of the countless times his father had made the same walk, the countless times his mother had stirred the fire. It was as though the simplest tasks became part of a rhythm older than the village, a song he had only now learned to hear. But with this awareness came a deeper restlessness, one that tugged quietly at him in the still hours. It was not the yearning to escape, nor the sharp ache of absence, but something subtler, a calling that did not yet have words. He found himself walking more often toward the edges of the fields, letting his eyes follow the horizon until it blurred. There, beneath the vast sweep of sky, he felt the truth he could not yet name, that the act of carrying would one day demand more than tending fires and lifting burdens. It would ask him to step beyond what he knew. The whispers, once soft currents in the air, seemed to confirm this. Their tone had shifted, not louder but more insistent, like a river finding new strength as it narrowed. At times they came as fragments of memory. The elder's laughter, his friend's determined stride into the unknown, his father's tired hands resting heavily on his shoulders. Other times they were simply silence, a pause so heavy it pressed him to listen with more than his ears. One evening, while the village gathered around the hearth fire in the square, he noticed how the faces of the elders reflected the flames, lines deepened by years, eyes bright with the echo of things unsaid. He saw how the children huddled close to their parents, their laughter quick, their innocence fragile. He realized then that every soul carried something invisible, hopes, fears, losses, promises, and that the whispers he heard might not be his alone, but a thread that connected them all. Later that night, he returned to the frost-covered chair once more. He sat where the elder had once guided, where decisions had been made and stories had been shared. Closing his eyes, he tried to feel not just his own weight, but the weight of the village, of all who had come before. For a moment, the silence thickened, and then a vision stirred. Not dream nor waking sight, but something between. He saw a river flowing, wide and dark, its surface reflecting both stars and shadow. Across it lay a bridge of stone, each block carved with symbols he did not know yet. Somehow understood, the bridge did not lead to one shore, but many, branching paths that stretched outward like veins. And upon the bridge, countless figures walked, some familiar, others strangers, each carrying something in their hands, something that glowed faintly, whether stone, flame, or memory. When he reached out in the vision, the whispers encircled him, their voices like overlapping waves. Every step is inheritance, every hand is continuation. To walk forward is to bind what has been with what will be. The vision dissolved, leaving him breathless beneath the cold night. He opened his eyes, and though the square was empty, he did not feel alone. The air was alive with presence, as though the unseen had drawn nearer, pressing upon him the truth of his vow. In the days that followed, he began to prepare without realizing it. His hands grew accustomed to carrying more than before, his ears sharper to the tones of silence, his heart steadier in the face of sorrow. He visited the tree often, not only to listen but to speak aloud, as though rehearsing words he would one day need. He told the tree of his fears, of his longing, of his confusion at the path stretching invisibly before him. The tree, ancient and still, gave no reply, yet its branches swayed as though in quiet assent. Then one morning as he returned from the riverbank with water, he saw his father waiting at the doorway. The man's eyes, though tired, held something unspoken, something that lingered in the space between them. Without words, he reached out and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. It was heavy, warm, trembling slightly. That touch said what the mouth could not. The time was near when the boy would no longer be shielded by the walls of home, when the weight he carried would shift from small burdens to the greater task waiting beyond. The boy understood without asking. A stillness spread through him, not of fear but of readiness. He knew he could not yet step onto that unseen bridge, but he felt its call beneath his feet, a steady current urging him forward. That night, as the stars stretched endless above, he whispered again into the darkness, "I am listening. I am ready to carry." And this time, the silence did not answer with echoes alone. It pulsed with presence, vast and unseen, as if the very night had leaned closer. The whispers merged into one voice, deep and unwavering. Then walk, child, walk when the moment comes, and you will not walk alone. The boy lay down with those words ringing in his chest, not as prophecy, but as truth, already unfolding. Sleep came slowly, yet it was filled not with restlessness, but with the calm weight of knowing that the journey was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability, that every step he had taken until now had been leading him to the threshold. And as dawn broke pale and cold across the village, the boy rose with it, carrying not only the day's work, but the quiet certainty that his story was about to turn. The horizon no longer seemed distant. It was waiting. The morning unfolded with a strange brightness, though the sun was veiled behind pale clouds. The boy felt it from the first step outside his door, that weightless pull in the air as though something unseen had shifted during the night. His father's hand on his shoulder lingered in memory, the unspoken acknowledgement that childhood was already fading behind him. Yet there was no ceremony, no grand farewell, only the simple rhythm of the day waiting for him. He carried the pail of water, tended the fire, and listened to the hushed cadence of voices around the village. But beneath it all, like a river under frozen ground, there ran a pulse urging him onward. The whispers followed him everywhere now, no longer scattered fragments, but steady companions. They no longer startled him. He had grown used to their presence as one grows accustomed to the hum of the wind or the crackle of fire. Yet their tone had changed again. Where once they soothed, they now beckoned, their edges tinged with urgency. In the quiet between tasks, when his hands rested and his breath slowed, he felt them lean closer, as though testing his readiness, as though pressing upon him the truth that waiting could not stretch much longer. That evening, after the village had eaten and the night fire was lit in the square, he found himself drifting away, drawn to the frost-covered chair once more. Sitting there had become a ritual, though he never spoke of it to anyone. Tonight, however, the silence was different. It was thick, holding its breath. And when he closed his eyes, he felt a warmth stir beneath the cold wood, as though the elder's presence had not fully left, as though the chair itself was waiting for him to understand what it meant to sit there. He remembered the vision of the river and the branching bridge, the countless figures walking across it with their glowing burdens. Now the image returned, sharper, more vivid, as if it had been waiting for him to return to it. He could see the symbols on the stones of the bridge more clearly, each one carved deep as though by countless hands. He reached again toward them in the vision, and this time, one symbol flared softly beneath his touch. It was not a picture, but a shape that felt like both flame and spiral, endless in its turning. The whispers surged, not as words but as feeling. He understood then that this was no vision meant only to comfort. It was instruction. The bridge was not only an image, it was a path he would one day walk, and the glowing burdens the others carried were not burdens at all, but the essence of their lives, their stories, their inheritance. His would be no different. What he carried would not be a weight to break him, but a light to pass forward. The vision dissolved into darkness, and he opened his eyes to find the night around him hushed, the fire in the square dwindling. He rose slowly, feeling his heart beat with a steadiness that frightened him with its calm. For the first time, he sensed not only that he was ready to carry, but that soon he would be asked to. Days slipped by, each one heavy with waiting. He began to notice things he had never seen before, the way the elders exchanged glances as though speaking in silence, the way his father's steps grew slower at dusk, the way his mother's hands lingered over his shoulders when she set a cloak upon him. The entire village seemed to know something he had not yet been told. It was as though everyone was preparing for a moment that had not yet been named aloud. One afternoon, as he walked along the river's edge, he saw his reflection ripple in the current. But it was not only his reflection, it was layered, shadowed, as though behind his face flickered others. The elder's stern gaze, his friend's determined eyes, even the faint outlines of strangers he had glimpsed only in dreams. The sight startled him, yet he did not turn away. He knelt by the water, staring until his reflection settled, and whispered, "I will not fail you." The river gave no answer, yet the current quickened, as if carrying his words downstream into the unseen. That night, when the stars burned brighter than usual, he lay awake long after the village had gone silent, and then he heard it, not the soft rustling of whispers, but a single, clear voice, deep as stone and vast as the night sky itself. The moment comes. You must rise when called. The boy sat upright, breath quick, though no one else stirred. The voice had not spoken aloud. It had spoken within him. It was not a suggestion. It was a summons. The next morning dawned gray, the air colder than before. The village stirred with unusual quiet, as though the very ground had grown tense. The boy's father spoke little, his eyes heavy with unspoken things. His mother placed food before him, but did not meet his gaze. The boy felt it in his chest. the hush before something begins. By midday, the call came. The elders gathered in the square, their voices solemn. The boy was summoned to stand before them, his feet unsteady. Though his heart burned with certainty, they spoke of change, of the need for one among them to walk beyond the fields, to carry their memory into the world, to listen where others had not. They spoke of burden, yes, but also of light, of inheritance, of the bridge that connected the living to the unseen. The boy knew then that what he had felt was not imagination. The whispers, the visions, the restless call, none of it had been dream. It had been preparation. His name was spoken by the eldest among them, not as question but as truth. He was chosen. He bowed his head, not in fear but in reverence. The weight he felt was vast, yet it did not crush him. It steadied him, for he understood now that carrying did not mean walking alone. It meant walking with every voice that had come before, with every whisper that would follow, with every unseen hand resting gently upon his shoulder. And as the village stood silent, watching, the boy felt the moment turn. He was no longer only a listener. He was becoming the one who would answer. The boy did not sleep that night. After the elders' voices faded into silence and the square emptied, he returned to his small corner of the home and sat cross-legged in the dim light. His father had placed a hand on his shoulder, brief and heavy, as though to say everything and nothing at once. His mother had looked at him as if memorizing his face. He felt them both beside him in spirit, though no words passed between them. There are moments when families know speaking will only unravel the thread of strength holding them together, and so they stay quiet, letting love be understood in the spaces between. When the first pale light crept through the cracks in the walls, he rose. His body trembled, but not from weakness. It was the trembling of a string pulled taut, ready to hum its first true note. Outside, the village was already awake. People stood scattered along the square, their eyes lowered, their mouths still. The air carried a weight that pressed gently but firmly against his chest. It was not grief they bore, nor fear. It was something older, a recognition that what was happening belonged to time itself, larger than their single lives. The elder who had first noticed him years ago stood at the edge of the square. His presence was thinner now, his body frail, but his gaze still burned with clarity. He did not speak much, only nodded as though passing something invisible from himself to the boy. That nod was heavier than any command could have been. It was the closing of one season, the opening of another. He walked slowly through the village, his steps unsteady but resolute. Children stared with wide eyes, their small hands clutching their mother's robes. Men and women stepped aside, clearing a path without needing to be told. It was not ceremony, it was instinct. Every step felt like a thread tightening, weaving him into something larger than himself. As he left the square, the whispers rose, not scattered but united, flowing like a single voice that had been waiting for this moment. He could not make out every word, but he did not need to. Their rhythm was enough, like a song sung just beyond the edge of hearing, urging him forward. His heart slowed, steadied. He felt less alone. The path beyond the fields was familiar, and yet not. He had walked it before in play, chasing shadows, throwing stones into the air, imagining worlds that were not there. But today, the path stretched into something endless. Every rock and root carried new meaning. Every turn in the earth seemed to ask him if he was truly ready to step beyond where others had stopped. He did not answer aloud, but his steps carried the reply. Hours passed, the sun climbing, the air warming, and still he walked. The rhythm of his feet began to merge with the rhythm of the whispers, until they became one. It was then, as the world around him softened into a haze of light and wind, that the river appeared again. Not as a vision this time, but as itself, flowing strong and clear before him. He stood at its edge, the same river he had seen 1,000 times in dream, its current glistening with threads of light just beneath the surface. He knelt at the water's edge, cupping his hands into the cold stream. The chill stung his skin, grounding him in the moment. He thought of the reflection he had once seen, his face layered with others, and he leaned closer to the water now. The image returned, but sharper. Behind his features flickered the faces of those he had loved, those who had guided him, and even those whose voices he had only heard in whispers. They looked at him without accusation, without demand. They looked as if they were waiting for him to see that they had always been part of him. Tears pricked his eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition. He touched the surface of the water, and ripples carried the faces away, scattering them into shining fragments of sky reflected above. He whispered softly, almost afraid of the sound of his own voice, I carry you. The river's current surged in reply, stronger, as though acknowledging his words. He rose, following the bank until the river bent into the forest. The trees here grew taller, their shadows thick, their roots twisting like the limbs of old guardians. He moved through them with care, his breath deep, his senses sharpened. For the first time, he felt the silence around him shift. It was no longer the silence of absence, but the silence of watching, as though unseen eyes lingered just beyond the branches. He did not hurry. He knew that to fear the forest was to dishonor what had brought him here. So he walked as one invited, not as one trespassing. Deep within, the air cooled. Shafts of light broke through the canopy, illuminating patches of moss like scattered constellations upon the ground. He paused in one of these circles of light, standing still as the whispers quieted, replaced by a deep, resonant hush. Then from somewhere above, a single feather drifted down, white, slender, glowing faintly as it spiraled through the air. It landed before him without sound. He bent, lifting the feather in his hand. It pulsed gently, as though alive. At his touch, images stirred, fleeting impressions of journeys, of others who had walked this path, of burdens carried and laid down. He felt the weight of their steps beneath his own, layered upon the earth, like echoes. The feather dissolved slowly into his palm, leaving warmth behind. He closed his hand around it, though nothing physical remained. Something had been given to him, something unseen, and he knew its meaning would reveal itself in time. Night began to fall, and he found a clearing by the river's bend. There he built a small fire, the flames crackling low, their glow trembling in the dark. He sat with his knees drawn up, watching sparks drift into the air like tiny stars fleeing upward. He thought of his parents, of the elder, of his friend with the boundless laughter. He thought of all that he had left behind, and all that still lay ahead. The ache of longing stirred in him, but it did not overwhelm. It was softened by the knowledge that he was not walking away from them, but carrying them forward. When the fire dimmed and his eyelids grew heavy, the whispers returned one last time before sleep, tender and close, like breath against his ear. You were not alone. You never were. He let the words cradle him as darkness folded around, and in that quiet he drifted into dreams where the bridge awaited once more. The boy woke to a pale light pressing gently through the canopy, the air cool and still, the embers of his fire reduced to a faint glow. For a moment he lay unmoving, listening to the river's steady voice in the silence that surrounded him, a silence that did not feel empty but alive, as though every branch, every stone, every current carried a breath of awareness. Rising slowly, he brushed the earth from his clothes and stepped toward the water's edge. His reflection greeted him again, but this time it did not waver. Behind his face, the familiar outlines of others shimmered faintly. The elder's steady gaze, his parents' quiet strength, his friend's laughter now softer, like an echo from far away. They did not press upon him with questions or demands. They waited, calm and patient, as though asking only that he remember. The path ahead unfolded with quiet insistence. He followed the river deeper into the forest until the trees thinned and the land sloped toward a meadow. The air warmed, carrying with it scents of grass and wild flowers, the kind of fragrance that makes one pause without knowing why. He stopped at the edge, gazing across the expanse. The field seemed ordinary, yet he felt in his chest that it was not. The whispers confirmed it, stirring faintly within, telling him this was a place where others had once walked, where burdens had been set down and gifts had been left behind. As he crossed the meadow, he noticed small stones arranged in patterns half buried in the soil, spirals, circles, lines intersecting at sharp angles. He knelt by one and traced its edge with his finger. The stone hummed faintly, not with sound but with memory, vibrating in rhythm with his own pulse. He realized then that each stone was a mark left by someone before him, each one an offering, a reminder that the path was never walked alone. Some stones had nearly vanished beneath grass, yet their presence lingered, stubborn against time's attempt to erase them. The boy set his own stone upon the earth, small and smooth, found along the river's bend. He pressed it into the soil with his palm, whispering no words, only allowing the weight of his heart to rest there. In that moment he understood legacy, not as glory, not as names carved into monuments, but as these quiet markers scattered across the earth, felt by those who notice, carried forward by those willing to pause. He continued until the meadow gave way to rising ground, where the forest closed in once more. The climb was steady, the path winding, roots catching at his feet. Each step felt heavier now, though not with fatigue alone. It was the heaviness of understanding that what he carried was not meant only for him, but for those he had left behind, and those he had yet to meet. The whispers no longer comforted, as they once did. They pressed, reminding him that the light within must one day be handed over. As evening fell, he reached a ridge where the land opened wide, Before him stretched valleys and rivers, forests and distant hills fading into the horizon. He stood there long, the wind tugging at his cloak, the vastness both humbling and steadying. For the first time, he sensed the thread of his journey stretching far beyond his own sight, weaving into places and lives he might never touch directly, yet would somehow affect. The thought both burdened and comforted him. That night he built no fire. Instead, he lay upon the earth beneath the open sky, watching the stars kindle one by one. Their quiet persistence filled him with a strange peace. He thought of the bridge again, its arch stretching across the dark, its stones carved with symbols. Now in the starlight, he realized the bridge had always been more than a passage for him alone. It was a structure made of countless lives, countless small offerings like the stone he had placed in the meadow. Each whisper he heard was another stone, another life contributing to the crossing. He was both carrier and carried, both builder and traveler. Sleep came slowly, folding around him with the tenderness of a cloak. In dreams, he saw himself older, his hair streaked with silver, his face lined not with sorrow but with time. Children gathered at his feet, listening, their eyes wide, not with fear but with wonder. He was telling them stories, not of battles or victories, but of rivers, stones, and whispers. The dream filled him with warmth, though he woke before its end. The fire of dawn rose behind the hills, and the vision clung to him like mist, leaving him with the quiet certainty that his path was not only for himself, it was a thread meant to weave into the lives of others. By midday he encountered a traveler on the road, the first soul he had seen since leaving the village. The man was older, his cloak frayed, his pack heavy, yet his eyes bright as though lit from within. They exchanged no grand words, only sat together for a time by the river's edge. They shared bread, broke silence with small laughter, and when the man rose to continue on his way, he left behind a simple token, a carved piece of wood, smooth from many hands, shaped like a spiral. The boy held it gently, understanding without being told that it too was part of the legacy being passed forward. As the sun sank and shadows grew long, he pressed the wooden spiral against his chest. The whispers rose once more, softer now, wrapping around him not as command but as blessing. He knew the road stretched far still, knew loss and weariness would come again. But for the first time he felt the word legacy settle into him, not as something distant but as something alive within his steps, his choices, his voice. And so, with twilight folding over the earth and the river carrying its endless song beside him, he walked on, the sense of inheritance burning steady, a quiet flame meant not to consume but to illuminate. The boy walked on through the folding twilight, the wooden spiral warm in his palm as though it carried the quiet pulse of another heart. The road narrowed, hemmed in by tall grass, swaying with the evening wind. He did not hurry, nor did he linger. His steps were steady, guided by the strange calm that had begun to settle inside him. The whispers followed, not insistent but companion-like, as if they too had grown tired of command and now wished only to keep him company. He passed beneath branches that arched overhead like cathedral arches, their leaves rustling softly. In the hush, he remembered the elders' eyes, his parents' voices, the laughter of his friend. Each memory rose, not as a weight, but as a lantern, carried within, lighting the path, one step at a time. He no longer felt alone. The silence itself had changed. It was no longer the silence of absence, but the silence of presence too deep to need words. Night deepened, and the road bent toward the low glow of a village tucked against the hills. Its windows flickered with the faint orange of hearth fires, its rooftops drowsy beneath drifting smoke. He stood at the edge for a long while, watching. The village was not his own. The faces here would not know his story, nor he theirs. Yet he felt the invisible threads that tied them all together, the same fears, the same hopes, the same longing to leave behind something that would not be lost. A dog barked somewhere, a child's laughter floated faintly on the air, and the smell of bread carried from an open oven. He did not enter, he simply listened. And in listening, he understood that legacy was not only carved in stones or whispered by rivers. It was also found in the ordinary. The bread shared, the laughter carried, the fire tended. The simplest acts were also bridges, carrying something forward across time. When he turned away, the night had thickened. Stars spilled across the sky like seeds cast wide, and the moon rose with the calm authority of a guardian. He followed the silver light up the hillside, the earth cool beneath his feet. His breath came steady, though his heart began to tremble with a sense of approach, as though the road was curling nearer to some unseen threshold. At the crest of the hill, he paused. Before him stretched a plain of stillness, the land wide and silent beneath the watch of the heavens. There was no village, no river, no forest, only space, vast and waiting. He felt suddenly small, but not diminished. Instead, he felt as though the plane had been made for this very moment, as though every step of his journey had led him here. The whispers grew clear, not louder but sharper, like wind threading through chimes. They spoke not in words but in resonance, and he understood this was the place where one's burden was tested, where the flame within was asked to declare itself. He did not know what form the trial would take, yet he knew it could not be avoided. He walked into the plane. The ground shifted beneath him, not with violence, but with a slow, deliberate rhythm like a heart beating through the earth. Light shimmered faintly, forming lines that stretched across the soil, intersecting and weaving until they shaped a vast pattern beneath his feet. Spirals, circles, and bridges of light, echoing the stones of the meadow. Each step he took awakened more of the design, until the plane itself seemed alive with memory. Then the air thickened, and a figure began to take shape before him. It was neither shadow nor flesh, but something between, formed from the threads of memory and echo. Its face was many faces, shifting, blurring, settling into the eyes of the elder, the smile of his friend, the lines of his parents' gaze. And yet behind all of them was something greater, something that did not belong to any one life but to the sum of them all. The boy stood still, the wooden spiral pressed to his chest, and felt no fear. The figure moved closer, its presence both tender and immense. When it spoke, its voice was not outside him, but within, woven into his own breath. "You have carried light," it said, "but light is not kept. It must be given." The boy lowered his eyes, the weight of those words falling heavy and true. He had carried the flame as though it were his alone, guarding it against winds, protecting it from the dark. But now he understood. The flame was never meant to be hidden within him. It was meant to touch others, to be released, to continue where he could not go. Slowly, he raised the spiral. It glowed faintly in the moonlight, a small, simple thing, yet within it lived every hand that had touched it before his, every voice that had whispered into the wind. He held it out. The figure did not take it, but simply opened its palms. The boy placed the spiral there, and in that act, something within him shifted. The flame inside him surged, not outward but through him, filling him with warmth so great it brought tears to his eyes. The plane of light brightened, the patterns beneath his feet glowing with fierce clarity, as though his small offering had completed them. He felt the presence around him expand, not to engulf him but to embrace him, and in that embrace he heard the voices of many, not whispers now but songs, low and steady, carrying the weight of countless lives. The figure began to fade, its form dissolving into the glow. The spiral shone once, then scattered into threads of light that rose like fireflies into the night sky. The boy stood alone again, yet not truly alone. For the first time, he felt not just the burden of legacy, but its release. The knowledge that he was not the end of the thread, nor its sole keeper. He was a part of the weaving, one among many, and that was enough. The patterns on the plane dimmed, sinking back into the earth, leaving only silence and stars. The boy sank to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his heart light. The whispers were gone, not because they had abandoned him, but because they were no longer needed. Their work was done. He lay back against the earth, staring up at the sky, his breath slowing. Above him, the stars burned steady, infinite. He closed his eyes, and the silence folded around him, not as emptiness, but as rest. And so the night held him, carrying him forward, preparing him for the next dawn, the next step, the next turning of the path. The journey was not over, but neither was he the boy who had begun it. He was something quieter now, something steadier, a bearer who had learned the truth of bearing to give away what one cannot keep, and in giving to find peace. The boy did not know how long he lay upon the plain, only that when his eyes opened again, the stars had wheeled further across the sky, and the moon was leaning lower, its silver stretched thin against the horizon. His limbs ached, yet in that ache was something tender, the echo of release. He pushed himself upright slowly, as though rising from a dream, and for a moment simply sat with the night wrapped around him. The earth beneath him still seemed to hum faintly, not with urgency but with quiet satisfaction, as though it too had exhaled and settled into rest. He drew a breath and listened. The whispers were gone, and in their absence the world itself seemed sharper, more intimate. The chirr of crickets, the faint rush of wind over the grasses, the slow thrum of his own heart. All these sounds wove together into a kind of hymn, a music that had always been there, but which he had never truly heard, until now. He felt as though the silence he had once feared had taught him its language, and now he was able to understand the subtle song that lingers in stillness. Rising to his feet, he began walking again. His steps carried him down from the plain and onto a path that seemed faintly etched into the earth, not marked by stone or wood, but by the soft indents left from many feet long before his. It felt like stepping into a riverbed that had run dry, its course visible only to those who knew how to look. Each step reassured him that he was not lost, only following a trail too ancient to vanish. The night deepened into its quiet heart, and with it came a sense of inward turning. His thoughts moved not toward the villages he had left behind, nor the figure of light he had released into the sky, but deeper, toward himself. He felt the hollowness where the wooden spiral had rested, and though it was gone, the warmth it had once carried remained. That warmth seemed to flow outward now, carried in his blood, filling his hands, his chest, even the spaces between his breaths. He understood that the act of letting go had not left him emptier, but fuller, as though the flame he had released had also taken root inside him in a gentler form. The path curved, winding through a grove of trees. Their branches hung heavy with leaves that shimmered faintly in the starlight, each one trembling with a secret glimmer like dew turned to silver. He reached out and brushed his fingers across one, and though it did not speak, the leaf seemed to hold a memory of his touch, glowing a little brighter for a moment before dimming again. He walked on, realizing the world itself was now answering him. Not with voices, but with echoes. It was as if every step he took was met with acknowledgement, a silent reminder that he was part of something larger, something responsive and alive. As the grove opened, the air grew cooler, touched with the scent of running water. Ahead, a stream wound through the grass, catching the moonlight and carrying it like liquid silver. He knelt at its edge and cupped his hands, drinking deeply. The water was cool, startling, and yet it seemed to carry not only refreshment, but memory, as though every drop had traveled through roots, stone, and soil, gathering the stories of the land. He thought of the river he had known as a child, its surface broken by laughter, and wondered if this stream was kin to it, part of the same endless weaving of waters. Resting there, he saw movement beneath the surface, shadows gliding like whispers. Small fish darted, their scales flashing like scattered sparks, and for a moment he felt the same quiet kinship with them as he had with the trees and the earth. Everything seemed to lean gently toward him, not in demand, but in recognition. He had carried his burden long enough to be changed by it, and now the world met him as something new. When he rose, the horizon was faintly brightening, the first suggestion of dawn waiting just beyond sight. He felt no weariness at the long night, only a steadiness, as though something within him had adjusted the rhythm of both dark and light. His steps carried him onward, across the stream and up a gradual slope that rose like the slow breath of the earth. At the crest, he stopped, for the landscape opened wide before him. Below lay a valley that seemed to shimmer with its own quiet life. Mist curled above the grass, lit pale by the moon, and in the distance, mountains rose like great shadows guarding the edges of the world. The valley seemed both near and impossibly far, a place not yet touched, but somehow waiting for him. For the first time, he wondered if this was the true direction of his journey. Not the plain of light behind him, nor the villages with their glowing windows, but this valley, this place that seemed untouched by time yet dense with promise. He felt no command, no whisper urging him forward. Instead, he felt choice laid before him like an open hand. He could turn back, he could walk into another village, take a place among strangers, share bread and fire until his days ran out, or he could walk into the valley, toward the mountains, toward something unknown and perhaps never meant to be fully understood. He stood for a long time in that place of decision. The air was still, the mist shifting like slow breath, and in that stillness he felt the weight of every choice that had carried him here. He closed his eyes and remembered the figure of light, the spiral scattering into the sky, the elder's gaze, the laughter of his friend, the warmth of his parents' hands. Each memory pressed gently against him, not as a chain, but as a guiding current. When he opened his eyes, he stepped forward, not in haste, not in fear, but in quiet resolve. The valley accepted him like a deep inhale, the mist curling closer, the grasses parting softly beneath his feet. Each step felt less like travel and more like surrender, as though he was yielding himself to the road rather than forcing it open. The night was thinning now, the stars paling one by one. The boy, though he no longer quite felt like the boy who had left home, walked steadily into the mist. The valley wrapped around him, not closing him in but carrying him deeper, like a cradle rocking toward dawn. He felt the soft hum of the world beneath him, the quiet pulse of legacy flowing not behind him, not ahead but through him. And as the first bird called faintly from the unseen trees, he understood that the journey was not one of finding a destination, but of becoming a thread within the vast weaving. He no longer sought to know what lay at the end. The road itself was the offering, and his walking upon it the gift. The horizon brightened, a wash of pale gold breaking through the last hold of the night, and the valley stirred awake. He lifted his face to the coming light, his breath steady, his heart unafraid. The dawn met him not as a beginning nor as an end, but as a continuation, the quiet promise that each step forward was already part of a greater story unfolding without end. The dawn unfolded slowly, as though reluctant to break the spell of the long night. The boy, though he no longer seemed only a boy, but something quieter, older, shaped by the journey, walked deeper into the valley. The mist curled around his ankles like drifting smoke, cool and soft, parting gently as though the earth itself were guiding him. The light grew gradually, slipping through the folds of the land in pale ribbons, and with each step forward the shadows retreated, not vanquished but woven back into the hidden corners where they belonged. He felt the weight of the night behind him and the hush of the valley before him, balanced in a moment of transition that seemed to stretch wider than time. It was not urgency that pulled him forward, nor restlessness. Instead, it was the sense of being carried by something larger than his will, a rhythm he had learned to listen for, like the faint pulse that lay beneath silence. His breath moved with that rhythm now, slow, even, steady, as though he had become an instrument of the dawn itself. He came upon a meadow spread across the heart of the valley, its grasses glittering with dew. Each droplet caught the rising sun and fractured it into miniature stars. He paused, overwhelmed by the strange beauty of it, as though the night sky had fallen to the ground to rest a while. In those glimmers he thought he saw fragments of the wooden spiral he had released. The light dispersed, scattered, yet still alive, still present. Perhaps what we release is never truly gone, he thought. Perhaps it only changes shape and waits for us to notice. Crossing the meadow, he noticed a figure seated at its far edge, where the grasses dipped toward another bend of the stream. At first he thought it a trick of the mist, a shape carved by shadow, but as he drew closer, he saw the quiet form of a woman cloaked in pale cloth. Her hair fell loose across her shoulders, touched by the early sun so that it seemed spun from gold and silver both. She sat with her back straight, her hands resting upon her knees, her gaze fixed upon the mountains that held the horizon. He did not speak at once, nor did she turn to him. Instead, he lowered himself gently to the grass a few paces away, sensing that silence itself was part of her presence. For a long moment, they simply sat together, two still points in the wide valley. It felt less like an encounter and more like a continuation, as if she had been waiting not for him exactly, but for the moment when their paths would meet. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost as if it were part of the air rather than a sound upon it. "You've walked far," she said. "Farther than most would dare without knowing where the road leads." He nodded, though his throat felt tight, the words caught within him. "I followed what was placed before me," he managed at last. Her eyes moved toward him then, steady and luminous. "In following, you've learned to let go." There was no question in her voice, only quiet certainty. He felt himself flush with the strange truth of it. "It didn't feel like learning," he said softly. "It felt like losing, again and again, until I realized, perhaps there is no difference." A faint smile touched her lips, though it carried the softness of sorrow. Most never come to that understanding. They cling to what is passing, until their hands close around nothing. The wind stirred then, moving through the meadow, bending the grasses in long waves. He thought of the elder, of his friend's laughter, of the warmth of his parents' hands. Each memory moved through him like the wind, pressing gently before flowing on. He realized he was no longer afraid of what might leave him, for what had left had not abandoned him. It had become part of the rhythm he now carried. The woman rose then, her movements fluid, unhurried. "The valley is not a place to remain," she said. "It is a crossing, a moment between. You have reached it because you were meant to rest in it for a time, but the mountains are what wait for you." He lifted his gaze toward the dark ridges rising beyond the mist. They seemed immense, almost otherworldly, their slopes bathed in shifting light, their peaks veiled by drifting clouds. A part of him trembled at the thought of stepping into their shadow. Another part stirred with quiet recognition, as though his feet had already been walking toward them long before he knew it. "Will I find what I'm seeking there?" he asked her, though even as the words left his mouth, he wondered if he had ever truly been seeking something at all. She tilted her head, her gaze resting upon him with a compassion that pierced deeper than any answer could. "You will find yourself," she said simply, "and when you do, you will see that was always enough." Her words lingered between them like a benediction. He wanted to ask more, who she was, how she knew, why she had waited, but something within him held back. Questions felt unnecessary, fragile beside the truth she had already given. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the stream, her pale form blurring into the mist until it was impossible to tell where she ended and the valley began. He watched until she was gone, though in his heart he knew she had not vanished. She had simply become part of the valley, as the light had become part of the stars, as the wooden spiral had become part of him. The boy, though he felt the name no longer fit, stood once more. His legs ached faintly, but it was the ache of life, of movement, of being carried forward. He looked to the mountains and felt neither dread nor longing, only readiness. The valley had given him its gift of pause, and now the road had called him again. The mist clung closer as he began to climb, yet with each step upward the horizon widened and the sun rose higher, bathing the slopes in pale gold. He felt the rhythm in his breath, the steady beat of his heart, and knew that wherever the path carried him, he would not be alone. The world itself was walking beside him, step for step, silence for silence. And as he moved toward the mountains, toward whatever lay beyond their hidden peaks, he carried with him the soft, unshakable knowledge that the journey itself was the destination. At every step, every letting go, every breath drawn into the wide sky was already the arrival he had been seeking all along.